This is part 2 on the lecture of the history of Judaism.
During the medieval period, from 638 to 1783, the diaspora was moving farther away from Palestine. Jews began to live in places they had never lived before: Western, Central, and Eastern Europe, Asia, the Arabian Peninsula, and portions of North Africa. There was a resurgence of science, mathematics, philosophy, and commentaries on the Bible and the Talmud. Rabbi Shmuel ben Adsak, a French Jew who became known as Rashi, wrote commentaries on the Bible and the Talmud that most Jews learned at a very young age. Through the development of Jewish philosophy, there were attempts to harmonize reason with faith. The most famous Jewish philosopher was Moses Maimonides. He argued that there was no contradiction between the philosophy of Aristotle and the Jewish religion. The medieval period was also marked by Jewish persecution. At the beginning of the 7th century, another monotheistic religion, Islam, came out of the Arabian Peninsula and was in competition with both Judaism and Christianity. Under Muslim rule, Jews were a protected people as long as they paid the tax for that protection. They were able to worship as long as they wished, as long as their synagogues were not taller than the mosques, and they could conduct their own courts. However, Jews were clearly treated as second-class citizens, and there were times when this protection did not hold, and Muslims persecuted the Jews. Just 4 years after the death of Islam's founder Muhammad, Muslims invaded Jerusalem, taking it away from the Byzantines. This was a mixed blessing for Jews. Muslims constructed a beautiful shrine called the Dome of Rock on the spot where the Holy of Holies of the Second Temple once stood. While Jews were outraged over the defilement of such a sacred place, they were not sorry to see the persecuting Byzantines ousted. While Jews faced persecutions, the Jews of Babylon were able to flourish under Persian rule. They built great schools and synagogues. In the middle of the 8th century, the Muslims moved their capital from Damascus to Baghdad, very near to the Jewish center of Babylonia. Muslims took on the daunting task of reintroducing ancient Greek writings to the medieval world. Jews helped translate the writings from Greek to Arabic for Muslims and Arabic to Latin for Christians of the West. From Baghdad, Islamic culture and civilization flourished, and Jews were very much a part of that expansion. A large class of Jewish merchants arose. At this point, Muslims and Christians were at odds with each other, and Jews proved to be good mediators between them. Trades between Christians and Muslims happened, but indirectly through the mediation of the Jews, opening up trade routes between East and West. As Muslim empires and trade routes expanded during the medieval period, so groups of Jews stretched beyond the borders of the Middle East. While the center of Islam was in Baghdad rather than Damascus, a remnant of Muslims moved early in the 8th century from Damascus to Cordoba, Spain. It was in Spain that where Jews thrived the most during the medieval period. Along with Muslims, Jews excelled in works as science, medicine, philosophy, metal crafts, and trade. Jews of the Mediterranean region became known as Sephardim, from a Hebrew word for Spain. In the 12th century, however, Muslim Berbers came to power in Spain and ousted Jews from the country. Among those who had to flee was the family of Moses ben Adam, known to the Jews by his acronym of Rambam and known in the West as Maimonides. Refugees from their beloved Cordoba, they finally ended up in Egypt. The later years of the medieval period brought other persecutions to the Jews. The French and German Christian crusaders marching to Jerusalem to gain the Holy Land from the Muslims burned and destroyed almost all of the Jewish communities along the Rhine River, murdering thousands of Jews. Other Jews, along with Muslims and Eastern Christians, were killed when the battle reached Jerusalem in 1099. It was during this time that Jews in some areas of Europe were first to wear some sort of clothing and live in areas of town that would distinguish them from non-Jews. Distinguishing Jews from other members of society and denying them ownership of land was meant to humiliate them. The only way out from just such degradation was to move or convert to Christianity. In the 14th century, France, Germany, and Austria were added to the list of countries that expelled Jews. In addition, Jews were commonly blamed for the Black Plague, a devastation that killed around one-third of the population of Europe in the 14th century, but church leaders came to the aid of Jews in this instant. Jews living in Spain did not receive the same support from the church in the 15th century. In that century, the reigning monarchs of Spain, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, had been fighting an uphill battle against the Muslims, especially to reclaim Spain as a purely Christian country. This reconquista, or reconquering, required that all inhabitants who were not Christian convert to Christianity or leave the country. A number of Jews did convert to Christianity, and they were known as conversos. However, a number of these conversions were in name only, and some Jews continued their religious practices secretly. Of course, this was unacceptable to the Spanish monarchs. The infamous Spanish Inquisition was instituted specifically to weed out conversos who continued their Jewish practices. No other group considered heretical was targeted initially by the Inquisition, though it did spread eventually to other groups. Also, even if someone did admit to continuing secretly in Jewish practices, they were still put to death. In 1492, Jews who had never converted to Christianity were expelled from Spain by Ferdinand and Isabella, who were procuring funding for Christopher Columbus's first voyage. By the end of the 15th century, Jews were mostly absent from the Spanish landscape. The majority of Jews went to Portugal, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. Jews in Turkey fared the best, helping to keep the expansion of the Islamic Ottoman Empire. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century was no kinder to Jews. Protestant reformer Martin Luther of Germany wrote the book concerning the Jews and their lives, which advocated for the destruction of everything Jewish, including their homes, synagogues, books, and property, and forbade the Jews themselves from being anywhere near a Christian town. The various persecutions of Jews during the medieval period left the majority of Jews in grim poverty. Many Jews were driven from cities into the countryside. Unable to own land, they were serfs and servants for most of the Christian landowners. Both poverty and discrimination left Jews in religious poverty as well. It was a struggle to practice Judaism or even muster the strength to pray to God. Soon a message of Hasidism from the Hebrew meaning pious, and with each group call a leader, are found in Orthodox Judaism today. The Age of Enlightenment, a philosophical movement of the 18th century that emphasized the use of reason to analyze previously accepted doctrines, ushered in the modern period. Closely associated with this movement was a philosophy of Jewish enlightenment that was meant to emancipate Jews from their social and legal situation. No longer the chattel or property of prelates and feudal monarchs, Jews were achieving equality before the law alongside their Christian fellow citizens of Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Britain. Tsarist Russia, however, was a different story. The 19th century was especially brutal, with its hundreds of government-sponsored pogroms, expulsions, and deportations of Jews across the country. Tsar Alexander III promulgated what became known as the May Laws against Jews. The government produced a clearly forged document of the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, purportedly written by Jewish leaders. This false document outlined a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. The government wanted to make Jews a scapegoat for their corruption and economic failings. Many Russian people obliged. Because of the protection of the monarchy, Jews were able to thrive in Poland until the tide turned in the 17th century. In Poland and other parts of Europe, Jews became known as the Ashkenazim, the Hebrew word for German, and they developed their own language called Yiddish. In Western Europe, there was an expulsion of sectarian groups in the Jewish tradition. In Germany and later in the United States, Reform Judaism emerged, advocating full integration into the culture where one lived. In the United States, the rise of conservative Judaism counteracted Reform Judaism, modifying Jewish tradition in a limited manner. Thus, Orthodox Judaism was also a reactionary movement in the response to Reform Judaism. Orthodox Judaism is the most traditional wing of Judaism, insisting its members strictly follow the Torah. In the 1930s, Reconstructionist Judaism emerged from conservative Judaism, advocating Judaism as a culture, not only a religion. Reconstructionist Jews do not believe in an all-powerful God, nor do they accept the Torah as divinely inspired. The end of the 19th century saw the beginning of Jewish nationalism known as Zionism. The Zionist movement sought a return by Jews to the Jewish homeland, Palestine. The worldwide community was more responsive to the goals of Zionism after the murder of about 6 million Jews at the hand of Nazi Germans in the Holocaust of the 1930s and 1940s. In response to the Holocaust, the United Nations returned Palestine to the Jews in 1948. The new nation called itself the State of Israel. Yet the city of Jerusalem was still divided between the countries of Jordan and Israel. The holy places of Christians, Muslims, and Jews were under the jurisdiction of a Muslim country, Jordan. In 1967, the State of Israel recaptured all of the Jerusalem in a succession of strikes against neighboring Arab countries that became known as the Six-Day War. One of the results of the Six-Day War was that the ancient holy places in Jerusalem were opened to all visitors. Returning Palestine to the Jews has caused tremendous upset in the Middle East. Bringing peace to that part of the world requires a delicate balance that has as yet not been found.